This has been the Sunday for our annual financial report presentation, but we're not going to do it that way this year. I think we've had quite enough of financial reporting during these past number of months. So instead, this year, our parish newsletter, which goes out to all of our 1,750 families, went in the mail last Tuesday. The newsletter contains a letter from me. It contains a narrative describing the finances of the last fiscal year, and also a grid that compares the last 6 fiscal years. So you can read it in your own homes, and I tell you today, I encourage you to take a look, and most importantly, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support our parish, including financially, that enables us to continue to do what Jesus would have us do within our community, within the church at large. Thank you from my heart. Who would have ever thought we'd have a hurricane in Ohio? The power of that storm. And we want to help so much. There are people still in our community and neighboring communities that do not have power as of yet. Many of you lost power for a good deal of this past week. Our hearts go out to everyone. As you probably saw, our parish, St.Joseph Hall, has been a shelter under the watchful care of the Red Cross since Thursday night for anybody in our area that needs to stay warm and sleep. And we'll do that until the power comes back on. But so many people are asking, what can I do? I'd like to really help even more. So the bishops of our country have authorized a second collection next weekend that will benefit people that have been hurt by Hurricane Sandy, and this will be managed by Catholic Charities USA. So next Sunday, if you would like to contribute to hurricane relief, we will have a second collection. If you'd like to write a check, you can make the check out to St. Joseph Church, but just put in that little memo area on your check, hurricane relief, and we will see that it gets to Catholic Charities USA. And thank you for your prayers, your support, and your love. We're already in the year of faith. I've already given 3 talks about aspects of our faith, and I'm going to do a lot more as the year goes on. Wanted to call your attention to the talk I'm going to give next weekend. It'll be between the 8:30 Mass and the 11 o'clock Mass. So about 10 minutes after the 8:30 Mass is finished, we'll gather in St. Joseph Hall so you can grab a cup of coffee or some juice or a donut. And I'll give about a 35-minute presentation next weekend on the Sacrament of Penance entitled, Do I Still Have to Confess My Sins Anymore? These talks really want to just enrich our parish with a greater understanding of our faith. And sometimes at Mass, there's not quite enough time to do that. So you're welcome to come next weekend. Just wanted to let you know. In the benches, you'll see some prayer cards for the Year of Faith. On the flip side is the Apostles' Creed. And our Holy Father, Pope Benedict, has encouraged all of us throughout the world to pray the Apostles' Creed every day of this Year of Faith, and to take the opportunities at hand to enrich our knowledge of our faith, which is summarized in that Apostles' Creed. What a great opportunity we have before us. It's a great year of grace. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, and He alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength. Take these words to heart and heed them. We heard those words in the first reading today from the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy. And Jesus quotes that passage today in the Gospel according to Mark. He's asked by that scribe, which is the greatest commandment? And so Jesus uses that quotation, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then Jesus adds another line from another Old Testament book, the book of Leviticus. First was Deuteronomy, now Leviticus, and says, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus concludes, there is no greater commandment greater than these. Love of God, love of neighbor. How do you and I, with God's grace, enter this path of love? A story by author Kathleen Norton. And she says she had a friend named Willie. Willie went out to the state of Wyoming and he fell in with a drug dealer. And Willie thought he had it made. Lots of drug contacts, lots and lots of easy money. One day he was out riding with the head drug dealer. And as they were going down the highway, they saw a car coming towards them. And the drug dealer says to Willie, as he reached for his gun, I got to kill that guy. And Willie said it was at that moment that he realized he was on the wrong path, that he was in way over his head, and he needed to get out of that drug business altogether. That was a moment of grace for Willie. And so often, that's how it happens, where God opens our eyes that the path that we're on is a path that leads to death and destruction. And God calls us to name that and get it out of our lives with His grace, so that we enter the path of love and salvation. So many of the saints earlier in their life had toyed with sin. Paul of Tarsus, Francis of Assisi, hosts and hosts of others. Then they came to that moment where they heard today's gospel as though for the first time. What is the greatest commandment? To love God above all things, and to love your neighbor as yourself. They heard that gospel. They realized the path they had been on was one that led to death and destruction, and that instead, love of God, love of neighbor is really the director for our life. Holiness, becoming a Christian, becoming a saint, is a gradual process with God's grace. We're always on the way in our growth as disciples of Jesus Christ. Rabbi Harold Kushner, you know his name, author of Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? He remarked one time that when people ask him, where is God in my life? He likes to respond by saying, may I rephrase your question? I think what you're really asking me is, when is God in your life? Because after all, God is love. And when we love God, when we love our neighbor, we experience the presence of God, who is love. Another story for you. There was a lady who felt that God was very distant from her. God did not seem as close to her as God used to seem. And she was complaining to another lady who was older than she was. The older lady said, well, how about right now? You want God to touch you. Well, close your eyes and ask him. And so she did. And she began to pray, Lord, I need a sense of your presence. Lay your hand upon me so that I can know that you are here. And after a few moments, while her eyes were closed, she felt a hand on her shoulder. And she said, he touched me. And she went into some moments of joyful ecstasy. And then she finally opened her eyes and said to the older lady, you know, that felt awfully much like your hand on my shoulder. And the other lady said, well, of course it was. She said, you expect God all the way from heaven to reach down and touch you on the shoulder when I'm sitting right next to you and my hand is so much closer? So he used mine. God is love. Where is God? When is God? God is love. God is near. Another story. There was a woman working on her master's degree, going to school in the evening. She lived in Vermont. She'd drive to the state university. She'd come home late at night. And every night when she was on her way home, not far from her house, there was an elderly man standing out by the road, watching her go by. This happened whenever she came by at night. It happened no matter what the season was. She wondered, why did he seem to have this habit? Was there a grief in his life? Was he mentally a little unstable? So one day she asked her friend, do you ever see that fella out by the road at night? Her friend said, oh, I see him all the time. And she said, well, do you think he's a little touched upstairs? Doesn't he ever go home? And the other woman said, he's no more touched upstairs than you and I are. And yes, he does go home right after you go by. He's worried about you on these roads at night all by yourself. So he waits outside until he sees you go by and sees the taillights of your car go around the bend. And then he goes home. Where is God? When is God? God is love. Jesus says this sums up the law and the prophets. Love your Lord God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, your whole strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love is not something outside of our lives. Love is at the core of our everyday living. Love is the basis of our decisions. Love is what launches our plans. Love is the grounding of our prayer life. Love should be the motivation of our careers. Love is why we're here in the first place. God is love. If there are people in our world that wonder where God is, perhaps it's because they've not experienced when God is. And so the gospel today invites us to show them. Where is God? When is God? God is love. By loving God, by loving our neighbor, we experience the closeness of God, who is love.